Becky Becky is Gemma Wooliams, aka Woodpecker Wooliams, vocalist, harpist, clarinet player and synth wielder, and Peter Mason, ex-Fence Collective artist who's moved from folk through to synth pop and beyond into new territory. Welcome, Gemma and Peter.
Hi.
Hiya.
Hey. So how did you guys come together to work as Becky Becky? Because you're both musicians in your own right.
We were actually met just, I think, on the Brighton folk music scene. Do you remember how we met? You've got a terrible memory.
I have got a terrible memory, but I remember you creeping up to me after one of my gigs with a CD that you'd made of a remix.
Yeah, of the song called Superman, which is actually on the last record that we did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm going to ask about that later. So you met in Brighton in the folk scene and you just basically...
Yeah, so we had both been working in folk, kind of alt folk, indie folk kind of music for a while. Gemma still was, and I decided at the time that I kind of wanted to do something that I didn't know how to do, so I wanted to make electronic music. Because previously everything had been like on guitars and pianos and things like that. And I got to the point where I was like, I want to do something 100% solely electronic. And Gemma's music at the time was folk, but you had a lot of electronic elements in it. So I thought I could probably bribe you into joining the project.
You didn't give me anything.
Give you a good time.
So you didn't even know each other when you brought that CD to Gemma?
No.
That's how you met as well?
We'd been in a room together.
Yeah.
We'd been in a room together.
Yeah.
But that was about it. I think I knew who you were, because at the time you were doing loads of gigs. But yeah.
And basically you heard the track and were like, I can get down with this.
Yeah, I think so. I just thought, it sounds so weird. I reckon it'd be really fun. It'd be really cool. Yeah.
Cool. Well, there's a strong literary influence in all of your work so far. Good Morning Midnight is based on the novel of the same name by Jean Rhys. Maraca is based on a short story that Gemma wrote. So why is story such an important part of how you guys approach making music?
You want to take that?
It's a really good question. I think we might have different answers, but I think for me, there's something really exciting about taking a text that already exists and trying to transform it into a different mode. And also, I guess stories are like how we connect as people, and it sort of adds another dimension of being able to connect with an audience and like listeners. Try and create a kind of shared world with them, maybe.
Yeah, I also think that a lot of the songs that we do, a lot of the music that we make is like very storytelling rather than like our songs are very much like prose into lyrics. So starting from that approach, with like our inspirations in terms of lyrics come pretty much entirely from written fiction rather than being like other songs or other like turns of phrase. I think that a lot of our songs, if you just wrote them out, they almost form like a very, very short story. They tell a very direct story. They're pretty clear, and they just have more similarities with prose. And I think why that interests me, I guess, is I don't think I can write novels or fiction very well. So because I can't do it, that's a thing that interests me, that I'd want to do, that I'd want to like focus on.
Constantly challenging yourself, attempting things, biting
Yeah.
off more than you can chew.
I think if you don't know how to do it, it's worth doing. And
Yeah.
as soon as you know how to do it, try something else. I think.
Absolutely. Chris has talked before actually about how he loves artists who are constantly struggling at the limits of their ability, because it's fine to go and see people who are virtuosos and amazing and technically at what they do, but there's no jeopardy in it. It's sort of boring, and to see some people really struggling to articulate and do things that are beyond their ability is...
Yeah, and I think that's us, because our ability is pretty limited, so we're always struggling.
It doesn't feel like that. I'm really excited about the new release, Human Animal. Lovely merch, by the way. Can you tell us the story behind this release?
Yeah, so the record started when a friend of ours, Francis Donnelly, sadly passed away a couple of years ago. Francis was someone that we both knew, and in that room that we were in before we met, we were both in that room because of Francis, because they had invited us there. And after they died, I wanted to hear some of the music that they produced, because they were a singer-songwriter at the time as well. They released a couple of albums under the name Animal Magic Tricks, and they also worked in kind of like a Scottish supergroup, I guess, with King Creosote. That was called Cold Seeds. And there were some songs that I knew of theirs really, really, really well from the time that me and Francis spent a lot of time together. And when they passed, I was like, okay, I want to hear that music, but could not find it. Or I could find versions of it, but I could not find like the definitive version, or like this is the true version of it. And yeah, so that kind of inspired both me and Gemma to sit down and record it. So we had a kind of version of it that we could listen to, basically, because we just didn't quite have the right version, and we knew that the version that we made was definitely not going to be the definitive version. And I think that is something that we, or at least I, kind of struggle with a lot with making music, because it takes me a long time to finish anything, because it's like, this has to be the definitive absolute version. Yeah, we can do live versions later, we can do remixes later, but there has to be an absolute definitive version. So this was quite an interesting thing to start with, because you're starting with what my goal normally would be being already impossible. So we're already going, okay, we're going to be making our version, not the version. And that started from like one cover of one of Francis's tracks. We did 2 more covers of Francis's tracks, but there's also like a load of other songs that we kind of had that similar problem of, we'd maybe recorded them a few times, we'd played them live, but we'd never made the definitive version. And like, I think you guys have spoken a bit about this, like with Wishlist was a song that took a while for you to get there.
Yeah.
And so what I felt that this time in recording the tracks of Francis and kind of getting away from like it being a super polished, finished version meant that we could also bring in some of those kind of old tracks and do it. So that's kind of how it came about.
I think also with Francis's music, my memory of it was that whenever they played live, it was a completely different version. Like, you know, different instruments, different tempo, just different organisation. And so I think Pete and I have had slightly different approaches to it. For me, that was a sort of point of inspiration. And part of my motivation of doing this was to sort of honour Francis and try and like bring some of their spirit into what we do and sort of learn from them a bit. Yeah,
I think that bringing their spirit into it is definitely another thing that informed the making of the album, because like the stuff that we've done so far has been very kind of, I guess, clinical and like prepared, and everything's very sequenced and recorded in like as best a way we possibly can. And Francis, when they made music, very much accepted kind of or brought into their music noise elements and found sounds and this kind of, like, you probably call it like a lo-fi aesthetic. And speaking of, like earlier we talked about, being at the limits of your ability, because we hadn't done that together, then it meant that the way of recording, rather than it like everything being like direct lines into the DAW and like recorded really cleanly with like effects done post recording and all that kind of stuff, we just sat in a room with a load of instruments that we had and just sort of improv'd and played over it and just sort of created it out of that environment, which was in that room that me and Gemma were in before. That's why we were in that room before, was because Francis had brought a few musicians together to just sit in a room and play and record and have fun. And while we have fun in Becky Becky, I don't think we really have much fun recording previously. So that's one thing that we brought into the approach of recording the album, was just sitting in a room and having fun.
Sounds like it must have been quite freeing for you both, but also challenging because it's a way you haven't worked together before.
I really enjoyed it, and I took like a real perverse pleasure in like testing Pete and seeing what he could do. Like, okay, we're going to play the rhythm on. It was like a metal lampshade. Like, okay, I've just started doing this. Like, find a way to record it, and we're doing 3 instruments at once, and we've got this tiny little microphone. You can figure it out later. Like, yeah it was good.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy that, Pete?
I did. I did enjoy it, but I also enjoy stressful situations. So it's that stress of like, how are we gonna? She's like, Gemma's already started playing. I need to record this. How are we going to do that? And I need to get on the piano to play that part or whatever.
Brilliant. You seem to have evolved an entirely new sound. So from there, what steered your choice of instruments and what gear did you use? Because there's quite a broad palette of sound in this album.
I think like for other albums that we've made, that there is a bit of both of us making decisions, but usually Pete's sort of at the helm and sort of the synth king and like programming things, and I come in and say, oh, I don't like that, change everything, but we sort of, that's how we work. But this time so it's normally in Pete's space, but this time we did it at my house, and there are a lot of sort of archival instruments from when I used to do the sort of folk projects. So just those are toy instruments and like out of tune zithers and like, kind of things you can just pick up and play with and have fun with. So we sort of started there and then just added more and more layers really. And then sort of supplemented it with more like sort of digital synth things. Back at yours.
Analog synth things.
Oh.
That's kind of right. A lot of the instruments at Gemma's house are out of tune. So that's another additional struggle. Is trying to play a piano which is about 3 notes out of tune, like 3 notes flat, and
3 semitones.
Perfectly 3 semitones?
Almost perfectly.
Yeah. But I find that a little challenging because I know how to play the song in the key of C, and I'm like, oh, now I've got to play it in A, and I have to like transpose it immediately. So so that was the kind of gear that we had at Gemma's. Stuff like the omnichord you've got, which we use quite a lot on it. Your out of tune piano is on quite a lot of stuff. Gemma plays a harp on a track, and so we did a kind of initial sound bed of that kind of more, or even if they're electronic, they're often just recorded in the room, so it's a bit more of an organic layer. Another couple of instruments that we used specifically for this album were inspired by the instruments that Francis most used at the time that they wrote the songs which we covered, which was a nylon string classical guitar. So we got one of those and a Casio tone, which we borrowed from you, and that's all over the record. And so that's a kind of acoustic or like organic bed. And then we added a lot of synths to it, and the kind of synths that we use on this album is probably the Moog Grandmother is on pretty much everything. And we use a lot of Electron boxes for like drums and additional synths and stuff like that. And in the MS-20 is on quite a few things as well.
Nice.
But I think another one of the differences of how we approached even the electronic music making is previously we would sequence everything, and if you know anything about the Electron music boxes, they're very powerful in terms of how you can sequence a lot of stuff to do quite interesting things. So we've relied on that a lot in the past, but with this time I think there's very little on the album. There's a few sections that are actually sequenced, and everything else is pretty much just played in, which is not how we would typically approach it. We would program it ahead of time. Even on things where we're running drum machines, they're not always actually just running a drum loop, a sequence drum loop, but we're punching in the hits whenever they come in. So we, even with the equipment that we're most comfortable with, it was trying to find a new way of, well, not a new way of working with it, but it's new to us.
I was just a blank page. I was just an empty space. You write the pen, and then you cross me out. You
And with all those acoustic instruments, how are you miking those up in the room? Because I take it sort of an untreated room, and it's just there's instruments everywhere. Were there any problems with that? Or was it pretty straightforward?
We had a mic. Was it your mic or my mic? We had a mic.
Yeah.
And a dictaphone.
Ah.
Yeah, we had a couple of mics. We had like a cardioid mic, a directional mic, a dictaphone from 1996, I think, which has got a really great sound of like completely. It's really good for vocals, for doing, you know, like that megaphone effect where you cut off the bass frequencies, but it picks up. It's got automatic, I think, compressor in it, so it just picks everything up in a really crunchy kind of nice way. So we used, that dictaphone is probably for the acoustic instruments that we use, for the guitar and charango, it's like a mini ukulele kind of instrument. All of those kind of things, were mic'd up with a dictaphone basically, because it's just got that 1996 dictaphone sound that very hard to recreate.
I don't know if you remember this, but we had a lot of I played a lot of recorder and penny whistles and the clarinet. Clarinet's got its own little pickup, but with the whistles and things and the recorders, I was just sort of wandering around trying to change the direction of it to change the sound. I don't know if that's actually had any effect in how it's been picked up, but
it's had an effect in trying to mix it. I can say that. But just made it more difficult, if that's the effect you were going for.
Well, with so much new process, were there any sort of major setbacks during the making of the album? Or was it just like each day presented a new, different challenge?
We lost an entire day's worth of recording once. Do you remember that?
no.
Oh,
Oh my goodness! Oh my! I've never seen you so close to a breakdown. And like honestly, I thought this was like a permanent breakdown. You like
end of the album.
End of Becky Becky. It was complete despair, wasn't it?
What happened?
I
Are you
mean,
ready to talk about it?
I can talk about it. It's just.
You forget to press record.
No, I didn't forget to press record. We had it all. We had the whole file. We had the whole day's recording in a project file, or maybe a couple of project files. And this is, I mean, it's just such a stupid thing. Instead of copying and pasting it into a backup drive, I cut and pasted it, but it didn't paste, but it did cut.
Oh.
Why?
And it wouldn't undo, and we downloaded disk recovery stuff and all that kind of thing. And it just went. So it's the difference between Control C and Control X is can be very, very risky. Yeah, an entire day.
How was it approaching, how did you recover from that and get back in the studio and do what you needed to do? Was it like, we just got to do it again?
I was probably ready to just give it all up at that point, but I think you probably said, let's just do it again. We've done it once.
Yeah, I think, that was our first take, wasn't it? So it was our first time working that way together.
Mm.
So I just thought, let's just treat it like a kind of practice, and like that is the nature of doing things in this sort of ad hoc way. Like it's fine that, like as we said earlier, there isn't a definitive version. Just
That's
do
a
it again.
really good attitude to have.
Yeah, and then the next time we recorded, I think everything was triple backed up and
Nice.
constantly
Yeah.
triply backed up.
Lesson learned.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So, Peter, you describe Francis first playing Suck It to you on an old piano in the woods. This is like a beautiful orchestral yet synthy track that evolves. It's quite cinematic and huge, but it still has that fundamental piano element in it. Did you sort of always have an idea for how this sounded in your mind, or did it take a lot of exploration to arrive at how it ended up?
I think exploration is definitely a part of it, but that song was like one of the ones that I knew we wanted to do, because that is a song that Francis played for me on a piano in the woods on the day we met. But also Francis said, like, I'm giving this song to you, which is something that I think Francis did on quite a few of her songs. There's quite a few songs which they wrote, but other artists in Brighton, like, it became their song that they played because Francis gifted it to them. So this was a song that was gifted to me. So when I came to record it with Francis, like a couple of weeks later, we weren't really able to do it, like my version of it, and we ended up just recording Francis's a kind of version with Francis leading it. And getting hold of that recording was really difficult because it was recorded at a producer friend of ours' house who I hadn't seen for like years and years. So tracking down that track was a real achievement, and the basis that we took off that track is basically the recording we had is Francis singing. So we took the melody from that of the vocal melody, and then the whole thing is played on piano, and that piano part runs through the whole track. I think you start out by playing out on the harp for a bit, then it moves into kind of like a synthy bit, and then there is a piano-led bit at the end which does nod to the original piano part. But that piano part on different instruments is throughout the song, so we knew that maybe we didn't know the tone of the instrument that it would be, but we knew the kind of basic notes of the main instrument all the way through because we had this reference recording. So we recorded the harp as a kind of basis, and then the kind of piano outro, and then a lot of the other instrumentation over the top of that was just improvised, like on a glockenspiel and a few different instruments that we had at hand. So it's weird, like I didn't have an idea of what it sounded, but I knew what the notes were going to be. I knew it's almost like we had the sheet music for the piano part and how we played that and on which instruments we played it. We figured out as we went along.
Yeah, so you said that it was difficult for you to record the vocals when you first went into the studio with Francis that day. I wonder what it was like for you, Gemma, approaching recording a song sung by, not only is somebody else's song to begin with, but someone so close to you.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting, and it was a bit difficult because obviously, Francis had passed away and she's someone we cared about. And they're also kind of, on the surface, quite a few things in common between Francis and I. And so by stepping into singing their songs, it sort of felt a little bit like it was a really fine line to walk between being like an invocation of them, but not wanting to try and like mimic them or sing it as they would have sung it, if that makes sense. So it was tricky, but it was emotional. It was difficult, but it felt like an honour to be able to sort of participate in their music.
Yeah. I love discovering Becky's first song, Superman, among these tracks. Can you tell us a bit about how that was made then and now?
This is going to start with you because this, I think, might be the only Becky Becky track which you have the entire writing credit for. Because it actually started as a Woodpecker song, right?
Yeah, I think I don't even know how you had a copy of it because I think it was a Woodpecker Wooliams song that I obviously wrote it, but I don't remember recording it. It certainly didn't release it. Like it might have been a live recording or something, or just like a little demo at home. And it was kind of like a silly little, not exactly a gift song, but a song for a friend who was a removal man, and he was always being really generous with his time, but never had any time for himself. Was always driving people around in his van. So I made him this little song. Yeah, it would have been super DIY when I originally made it. And then I imagine, you can correct me, but I imagine you just took my voice and then redid it for the original
how did you get
Becky
hold
Becky
of it?
version.
So yeah, you recorded it with 184, who's a producer who worked with Francis, and he had a project called Button Eyes, which had a load of Brighton like musicians on it. You recorded it with him, and then he gave me the files. That's how I had it.
Sneaky.
And then so I did like a kind of, I guess you'd call it like a Becky Becky proof of concept track where I took the vocal and I put it on some electronic music to give to Gemma to be like, look, if we do something together, that's you, that's me. Like let's see how it works. So that's how that first came about. And then when working on this record, so we were looking at the covers of Francis's tracks. It was around the same time that they wrote those tracks that we had the Superman like remix happening. So it seemed like a natural one to go on the album because there was the version that you had recorded, which was never released. There was the remix version we'd done as proof of concept, which was never released. There was and a few other like alternative versions. And so I think we just basically sat down and remade it. And I think it's basically in kind of 3 sections, and I think the first section is very similar to the remix that I handed to you when we first did it. It's like newly recorded, but very similar in style. The second section is just like a bonkers 1990s electro like version of it.
Yeah.
And then the outro of it is kind of a mix of those two, but also has the original instrumentation that you recorded on, which is like an old organ. I don't know exactly what it was.
Oh yeah.
Some kind of organ.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was like a electronic wind organ. You know,
Niwi?
maybe. It was kind of brown and old, and when you plugged it in, it went. Then
Wow.
Yeah, you can get them from flea markets and stuff. You know,
yes,
those kind of ones.
yes. We used to have a little Antonelli one. I love it. Unfortunately, it got a little wheezy in the high notes, and we had to get rid of it. I miss it. They're so lovely, those instruments.
Yeah. I think also it reminded me of 184, the producer. That song, like Pete says, comes from a time when it's also when it was early Woodpecker Wooliams days, and we'd all be around each other's houses sort of doing versions of songs for each other, or backing vocals or remixes, or it was a really lovely collaborative time in Brighton, and Francis was part of that, and you know people would sort of come and go, and it felt like a special time really.
The album feels cinematic in both its sonic palette and its journey through these memories. You've actually created an audio-visual album here, which people can watch on YouTube, but they can also buy on VHS. Why was it important for you to give the whole piece a visual component?
The VHS is now sold out, so you can watch it on YouTube though. So yeah, why was it important to have a visual element?
It's something we've sort of been moving towards in previous things we've done, isn't it? So we did a reworking of one of the Knifes albums, and that was we had like a lot of visuals for the live shows for that. And for Good Morning Midnight, for the live shows as well, we had like sort of multi-layered videos involving us. Dancers that came on stage. So I think we've always been interested in, like, again, it sort of ties in with storytelling, trying to enrich, like, yeah, I would say like enrich music as much as possible to help create these worlds.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think what we try and do is just an audio album doesn't feel enough for us. So I think we always want to do, like, the audio album is the backbone of something that we build on top of it. So with Good Morning Midnight, the first album, I would say it's the show that we then put together with it, which was audiovisual, had dancers and people on stage and so on like that, and making that slightly more theatrical than just turning up and playing your songs or whatever. So that's what we do with Good Morning Midnight. With our second album, we did an album called Maraca, and we did that as a book as well. That was
Woodland Recordings.
With Woodland Recordings as a label for that one. And so, yeah, that made it, at least for me, that makes it more interesting that you're making the album, but you're also making, in that case, a book. So for this one, the question for me is always going to be, okay, we know it's going to be an album, but what else is it going to be? And so, like, we'd experimented with like a bit of animation, and we've obviously made music videos before, and we've done stuff with projections in live shows, but I wanted to take the opportunity this time to expand that into like one cohesive whole visual piece that goes alongside with the album. And also because in the full version of the album, there's like narration between the tracks, which kind of is there to give a bit of context, to give a bit of share a few memories of Francis and of the time that we were thinking about when we made this record. And I felt that that was almost going into podcast territory. I didn't want it to go into podcast territory because I didn't want to focus on that. I wanted it to be something a bit more visual. And then Gemma, for the project, created a load of illustrations I was like, okay, we've got illustrations, we've got narration, we've got the music, and I think we can put that together into like a linear experience, start to finish.
I think we're also, we're working with memories. That's a big part of for me, I think, for this album. And there's an element of nostalgia and remembrance. And, one of the ways you sort of remember people who have passed as you go through your old photographs, your old videos of them. And it's sort of, I think for me at least, it's got a nod to that. And sort of, again, referencing the kind of lo-fi aesthetic of the time and of what Francis was doing. I think that's partly why it's VHS and cassette. And then, so I did do some drawings in the first place that's for Pete to sort of animate and take inspiration from. But I also found a bunch of old diaries from when I was a teenager at my parents' house with creepy little drawings in, and gave those to Pete to kind of, do things with.
Yeah, you were right, creep.
Are they in the orchestra on the stage?
No, that's all Pete. That's all Pete
too.
Yeah, everything else, the like weird little goat man playing a trumpet.
Nice. Yeah, it really feels like that. I mean, as coming from the outside, they're like artifacts, and they do have that quality of memory attached to them. So although the creation of this album began in grief, it feels to me like a very celebratory collection of music. It's intimate and detailed and heartfelt. It feels like a proper celebration of a life. I want to congratulate you both on the release of Human Animal. I think it's an incredible achievement, and I can't wait for the rest of the world to hear it. So where can they go to buy it?
Becky-Becky.com. You can get the record there. We were selling VHS. They've sold out at the moment. We do have it on cassette, which is like the next best thing, I guess. And then there's also digital download from Bandcamp, obviously. For that, we've said name your price, like donate what you want, because what we're actually asking for is if you listen to that, if you want to listen to that album and you want to contribute to something, there is a link on the Bandcamp to charities that Francis was involved in. So what we would recommend is, happy for you to download it for free and contribute to those charities instead. We are charging for the cassette because they cost money to produce.
Fair enough.
The digital download, I would recommend, So go to Bandcamp. So it's either beckybecky.bandcamp.com or just becky-becky.com.
Fantastic. What a beautiful tribute. Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining us here tonight, and good luck with the release.
Thanks very much.
for having us.
Oh, I'm still in love with you. You're just in love with yourself.